Right, hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Um, First of all, I just want to start out by saying that I think going forward, I'm going to try and make these videos shorter if possible. I realize that the two that I've made already have been, close to an hour long, and I know that for a lot of people, it's really hard to sit down and just watch an hour-long video. I recognize that. I have a hard time myself with stuff like that, so I'm going to make an effort going forward, and starting with this video, I'm going to try and keep it, under half an hour, preferably even, shorter than that. Um, I think there's lots of things that we're talking about, like when we were talking about homosexuality before, and we're talking about COVID now. So I think there's lots to say about those topics. And I could make hour-long, even 2-3 hour-long videos if I wanted to. But I think it's going to be better if we kind of break those down into separate videos because there is a lot to say, and there's no reason that we necessarily have to lump those all together. So I just want to start out by saying that. But as you can tell from the video today, we are going to be talking about vaccine mandates. So we are getting into a COVID issue. And this is something, like I said, I'm going to try and limit myself to just talking about what I had planned on talking about today. And there's a lot more that can be said about COVID, and that is something that, I will spread those out over other videos. I tend to get really into these topics when I start talking about them. I'm going to try my best to control myself and spread those further out. But to move along with this video, vaccine mandates. So this is something that obviously we're all familiar with COVID. I don't need to explain that. But, vaccine mandates are an issue that have, been very prevalent ever since they were created. So, specifically for COVID. But I feel like, just based on what I've heard, I feel like there's been a resurgence of this debate recently because you have had different courts, different states kind of, you know, say we're absolutely not going to, have mandates. We're not going to require people to wear masks or to get vaccinated. I feel like that's been in the news a little bit more, maybe, at least from what I've seen. And so I thought that it was going to be something that, it might be a relevant topic to discuss today. So I'm going to be showing my colors here in this video because the two main arguments that I hear against COVID mandates, vaccine mandates, that generally come from the far right, specifically Fox News. There's two that I hear. The first one is that it's unconstitutional. The second argument that I hear most often after that is that because vaccines do not actually stop the spread of COVID, it is therefore a personal issue, or it should be a personal issue or decision, and therefore my body, my choice type thing, which I find incredibly ironic. But that aside, and I'm basically going to be addressing those arguments and why I personally am for vaccine mandates. So the first argument is it's unconstitutional, like we just said. I think when we get into, Fox News and, every, like news network like CNN, MSNBC, I think they all do this where they insert their own opinions on things, which is fine. But I think when you're, a news organization like that, when you're being seen all across the country, I feel like it's very important that you make a distinction between what is fact and what is opinion. And I feel like those lines have kind of been blurred recently. So I think it's okay to feel as though, this isn't right. I feel like this should be unconstitutional. It violates my rights, whatever. But there's also the facts as well. And the facts are that it's not unconstitutional. So just to give a few, actual, examples. You think back to the founding fathers, George Washington, and sorry if I keep looking to the side here, I have my notes so I didn't forget anything. You think back to George Washington in 1796, he signed an act called the Act Relative to Quarantine, which basically allowed federal officers to go in and enforce local and state quarantine laws, social distancing, essentially. So, those are things that, that's not specific to vaccines, but it's a part of this whole public health idea of, you know, precautions that we have to take in the midst of a pandemic. The federal government does have that right. It does not violate your personal freedoms. But if you want to go specifically to vaccines, there was a case in 1905, Jacobson v. Massachusetts, where there was a conservative court that said that the state can enforce vaccines with penalties, and they specifically stated that, it does not violate your rights. And it was based on this argument. They really expressed this view that individual liberty is not absolute. That was the whole idea. So essentially, when you hear these people screaming about, liberty and freedom and, the government doesn't have the right to do this, again, you can feel that way, but that's not what the history of our country shows. The history of our country has shown multiple times that it is okay for, in the case of, global pandemic, whatever, that the federal government take these actions to protect its citizens. You have liberty, but you also have to think about other people around you. It's not just yourself who you're affecting. If you don't follow along with these regulations, you're affecting everyone. And, also the final example I have is, even just like the Sixth Circuit last year also made pretty much the exact same statement that said, mandates do not violate your liberties. So, this is something that not only do we see it in our history, we've also seen it in recent years, due to COVID. That example I just gave you in Massachusetts, that was all surrounding smallpox at the time. Obviously now it's COVID. But the same concept applies essentially, and that's what the Sixth Circuit said last year, which was that, again, you can feel as though your rights are being taken away from you, but they're not. This is something that affects everyone. It does not just affect you. So my whole reason for, bringing those things up was essentially to say, if you turn on Fox News or you turn on any other conservative, news site, podcast, whatever, and you hear people saying that's unconstitutional, just know that that's not actually a fact. If you look at the history of our country, we have never had any court say that, it's unconstitutional. That is something that people feel, and we have seen people start to push back against that, including recent decisions made by the Supreme Court. But just realize that that's not a part of the history of our country. We have never said that your rights and liberties are absolute, that you don't have to follow along with these regulations. The government still has the right to put these regulations in place if it's for the benefit of our entire society. So let's moving on to the second argument that I said I hear a lot of right-wingers tout, which is that the vaccine does not stop the spread of COVID, so therefore there's no reason to have a mandate. Well, there's a lot to be said on this topic. First of all, we've already established that mandates are constitutional, regardless of how you personally feel about it. They are constitutional. But again, that doesn't mean that the government can just go around and put in place all these mandates with absolutely no reasoning. So let's look at, what goes into the decision-making process behind these mandates. So there's two things that we have to think about when we think about putting mandates in place. The first one is, will this mandate help the individual? Will individuals in our country benefit from a mandate? And we already know, and people on both sides have acknowledged this, that vaccines absolutely help when it comes to COVID. They're significantly reduce your possibility of going into the hospital, of passing away from COVID. So on an individual level, yes, if you are fully vaccinated, the possibility that you might end up in the hospital, intubated, you might pass away, those chances decrease exponentially if you are fully vaccinated. So the answer to the first question, will it benefit the individual? The answer is yes. The second thing that we have to think about when it comes to a mandate is, will it benefit the public good? Will our entire community, will our population as a whole benefit from a vaccine mandate. And this is where a lot of people say, no, it won't. And, that's a valid point, like, as we've seen, I think when the vaccines first came out, I think there was this idea that, maybe, this is how we'll stop COVID. This is how we'll keep people from getting COVID and from spreading it. With the vaccines now being out for over a year, I think studies have shown that, unfortunately, they don't stop the spread of it. I myself, I am fully vaccinated, I am boosted, but I still got COVID back in December. Grandma, same thing. She was fully vaccinated, boosted. She got COVID back in December. So, yeah, it doesn't stop the spread of it. However, when we think about the public good, will it benefit our society if there's a vaccine mandate? I'm still going to argue that yes, it will. And the reason is, again, is that we don't live alone. Everything that, health-wise, that, that infects people in our country, it affects everyone. So think about it this way. How many times have you heard stories on the news of people who have had, health issues unrelated to COVID? They've had cancer, heart attacks, strokes, whatever. That people who have gone to the hospital to try and get treatments for their illnesses, who have literally been turned away because hospitals are so overrun with unvaccinated COVID patients. I feel like I hear a story at least, once a week about, there was a man that had a heart attack and he couldn't, go to the hospital because they had so many COVID patients. Even back when my grandma had to go to the hospital in December because she had COVID, she was in the ER for quite a while. Luckily, she even had a room in the ER. There were patients still, out in the hallways who couldn't even get a room there, let alone actually check into the hospital. So I think she was very lucky. Eventually she was able to check in and get an actual room at the hospital. But that took a while, and I think back to all the people who were in the hallways, and it's like, what happened to them, So, we talk about, nurses and doctors who from the very beginning, for 2 years now have, suffered, physically and mentally. It's been absolutely draining having to work these super long hours, having to work in hospitals nonstop. And the fact is that the majority of COVID patients now, over 90% of COVID patients in hospitals, are unvaccinated. So think about if people were to get vaccinated, if we did have a vaccine mandate for people who are healthy enough to receive a vaccine, think about how much it would benefit those nurses and those doctors. We could actually maybe go back to normal hospital operations. And people, who have unrelated COVID health issues, people who need cancer treatments, who are now dying because they can't get into the hospital, they might actually finally be able to go in and get normal health treatments. This is not, we cannot get back to normal, when we still have hospitals overrun like this. We talk about, I know a lot of people have said recently, we're never going to get over COVID, and this has gone on for too long. We just have to get back to normal life. Well, normal life doesn't just happen. We have to take precautions to make that happen. We have to be active. We have to make decisions for the public good, and that includes a vaccine mandate. And this is something that I can make another video on, but in terms of some of the health concerns that people had about the vaccine, I'm not going to go into it too much, but essentially it's an mRNA vaccine which was developed back in the 90s, University of Wisconsin. It's so clean. There's no dirty ingredients like some of the heavy metals like mercury that some people were concerned about. So people who are saying this vaccine is experimental, that it's harmful, that's just not the case. So obviously, there are some people with valid medical issues that they probably couldn't get a vaccine, and obviously we're not going to force that on those people. But for those of us who are able to get the vaccine, it's not just about, are we spreading it to other people? Yes, it can still be spread, but maybe our hospitals can get back to normal. Maybe people who are currently dying, including some of our veterans, right? I know the right is really, they like to think of themselves as the party that, supports law enforcement and military and veterans. I mean, there are veterans who currently cannot get treatment because of unvaccinated people in the hospital. So, to kind of wrap everything up, yes, COVID vaccine mandates would benefit the public good. Um, this is not a, it should not be a personal choice. Um, and furthermore, we are not going to be turning into a communist nation by having vaccine mandates and people walking around in masks. Like I said, there's a whole lot more, that we can talk about with COVID, but this is essentially what I wanted this video to be about. I want people to think about, mandates, and I'm open to different arguments. I've actually kind of shifted my idea on these things over the last year after I've heard different people speak, but this is my position. I feel very strongly about it. I think that right now, our country, a lot of people on the far right, but I think our country overall is being very much plagued by a sense of hyper individualism, which is that this affects my rights. I'm healthy, I don't need to worry about it, therefore I'm not going to follow these mandates. And the fact is that we need to be considerate of others. And there's a lot more to it than just, oh, am I going to give this other person COVID? There's more factors to consider. And I feel like, we're at a tipping point in our country right now, in a lot of ways, including COVID. So this is just something that I wanted to make a quick, short video on, just discussing some of those reasons why I support mandates. As always, please leave your comments. I really would like to see what your guys' ideas are and opinions. Let me know if you think I got something wrong, or if you disagree with me. Let me know if there's something I didn't cover. But yeah, thanks again for joining me for this video. I'm glad it's a little bit shorter than the others. I'm going to try and do that more going forward. And again, thank you guys for watching, and please like this video if you liked it, and feel free to subscribe, turn on notifications. I'm going to try and do videos fairly regularly, but as always, thanks for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day.